How a super empath tortures a narcissist. There comes a time when silence speaks louder than screams, and walking away wounds deeper than war. In a world where manipulation wears a charming smile and ego masks itself as confidence, the super empath rises, not as a victim, but as a vessel of truth. This is not about vengeance, it's about revelation. When the light of discernment shines on the darkness of deceit, the narcissist doesn't just lose control, they unravel. Today, I'm not here to teach you how to fight fire with fire. I'm here to show you how to become the storm that exposes every counterfeit flame. The greatest revenge of the righteous is self, mastery in the face of manipulation. The greatest revenge of the righteous is not retaliation, but self, mastery in the face of manipulation. When a narcissist targets a super empath, they expect an emotional feast, a buffet of broken boundaries, wounded reactions, and the sweet satisfaction of control. But what they never anticipate is the one thing they cannot consume, a soul that knows itself. You see, the narcissist thrives on chaos. They bait you, they belittle you, they dress cruelty in charm and call it love. But when an empath refuses to bite, when they recognize the game and step out of the arena, the narcissist is left wrestling with shadows. That's the power of self, mastery. It is the divine discipline of refusing to be ruled by reactions. It is knowing that your emotions are your servants, not your masters. The super empath, when mature and awakened, no longer dances to the tune of manipulation. They do not explain their worth, negotiate their peace, or shrink their light to soothe fragile egos. They operate from a place of quiet authority, a calm rooted not in fear, but in understanding. This is not weakness, it is wisdom. This is not passivity, it is purpose. The narcissist's greatest fear is not confrontation, it is irrelevance. And when an empath evolves beyond needing to be understood by the narcissist, when they stop defending themselves and instead start detaching from the dysfunction, the narcissist begins to starve, because manipulation only works when it finds a place to land. Gaslighting only works when you doubt your own fire. But when you know who you are, when you are anchored in identity, lies lose their leverage. The super empath doesn't need to scream or slam doors, they simply walk through them and close them quietly. That silence, its torment, that peace, its punishment, because it reveals a truth the narcissist cannot handle. They never had power, only permission, and that permission has just been revoked. The process of self, mastery, requires intention. It is the journey from reaction to revelation, from being emotionally hijacked to being spiritually aligned. The empath begins to ask different questions, not why are they treating me like this, but why did I allow this access? And in that shift, they reclaim authority. They realize that boundaries are not barriers, they are bridges to self-respect. They recognize that love without respect is just manipulation in disguise. They stop confusing intensity with intimacy and begin to discern between those who pour into them and those who drain them. This is where the torment begins, not because the empath seeks revenge, but because they remove supply. The narcissist cannot exist without a mirror, and the super empath becomes glass no longer reflecting their illusions, but revealing their emptiness. Understand this. When a person has mastered themselves, they no longer seek validation from dysfunction. They are not swayed by charm or crushed by criticism. Their emotions are not on public display, they are privately governed. That kind of strength is unnerving to the narcissist, because the narcissist doesn't just want control, they want chaos they can manage. But when peace becomes the empath's default, confusion has no place to sit. The narcissist may try harder, escalate the drama, provoke reactions, stir up confusion, but the empath has become immune, not cold but clear, not bitter but better, And that clarity, that refusal to participate in dysfunction, becomes the very thing that torments the manipulator. Because it is a mirror they cannot break, a truth they cannot bend. Self-mastery is spiritual warfare with a crown. It says, I don't need to destroy you to defeat you. I just need to be me fully, freely, without apology. It is the declaration that peace is not passive, it is powerful. It is the conscious decision to rise above without needing to look down. The empath tortures the narcissist not by vengeance, but by elevation. Every step taken in healing is a step away from the narcissist's control. Every moment of peace is a blow to their ego. Every boundary enforced is a signal that the old games no longer work. And the more the empath grows, the more the narcissist shrinks, not because the empath is trying to hurt them, but because the narcissist is exposed to the one thing they cannot manipulate, wholeness. Let this be known: the goal of the super empath is never revenge. That is too small for a soul so vast. The goal is restoration, alignment, and divine order. But in reaching that higher ground, the narcissist is left behind not as an act of punishment, but as a consequence of growth. And that in itself is the most profound justice, because nothing confuses a narcissist more than being ignored by the one they once controlled. Nothing rattles their kingdom of illusions more than someone who no longer plays court to their crown. The empath becomes untouchable not because they are cold, but because they are consecrated. They've walked through fire and come out flame-proof. They've cried their tears and found power in their scars. They've been broken, but now they are built. This is the power of self-mastery. It does not shout. It does not beg. It simply is. And in being, it disrupts every lie, every trap, every toxic thread of manipulation. The narcissist cannot understand it, cannot control it, and certainly cannot stand it. Because when the super empath learns to love themselves more than they feared losing the narcissist, the game ends and the healing begins. Not for revenge, not for punishment, but because the truth was always bigger than the lie, and that truth lived boldly, walked daily, and held deeply is the greatest form of justice a righteous soul can ever serve. When purpose meets clarity, the games of the narcissist crumble. When purpose meets clarity, the games of the narcissist crumble like dust beneath the feet of the focused. The narcissist survives in confusion, thrives in distraction, and builds their power in the fog of emotional entanglement. But once a super empath awakens to their purpose, not just their passion, but their divine assignment, the narcissist loses their grip. Because purpose is the compass that exposes every false direction. When a person understands who they are and why they are here, they no longer tolerate what doesn't align. The manipulation becomes obvious. The lies become louder. The tactics that once worked now feel childish, petty, and out of place. You see, clarity is more than knowing the truth, it's walking in it. It's no longer needing confirmation from the crowd because you've heard from the Creator. It's being so rooted in destiny that deception can't shake you. When you get clear on your purpose, your vision sharpens, your standards rise, and your spirit discerns. And suddenly, the narcissist's tricks lose their magic. Their mask falls off not because they changed, but because you changed lenses. The games of the narcissist are built on assumption. They assume you'll stay confused, assume you'll question yourself, assume you'll keep seeking their approval. But clarity breaks that agreement. Clarity cancels every unspoken contract you made while wounded. It exposes every compromise you made out of fear, not faith. The narcissist loses their influence when you realize that you were never the broken one, you were the one they feared would figure it out. And now that you see clearly, the illusion can't survive. When you know your purpose, you stop living by default and start living by design. You no longer react to their chaos, you respond to your calling. You no longer bend for validation, you stand in conviction. The narcissist can't manipulate someone who's been set on fire by vision, because vision gives you direction, and direction makes you immune to detours disguised as lovers, friends, or saviors. The moment the super empath aligns with purpose, their energy shifts. What once felt like love now feels like control. What once seemed like passion now feels like possession. Purpose purifies perception. It strips the narcissist of their camouflage. The compliments now feel empty. The gestures now feel performative. You stop giving your energy to emotional predators because you've finally realized that your energy is sacred. Your time is valuable. Your attention is expensive. You're not here to heal someone's brokenness at the cost of your assignment. You were never meant to be a rehabilitation center for a narcissist's ego. You were created for impact, for transformation, for legacy. And when you understand that, you stop entertaining distractions dressed in flattery. You stop negotiating with people who benefit from your confusion. Because once you have clarity, even your silence becomes a boundary. Even your absence becomes a sermon. The narcissist doesn't know what to do with that. They try harder, push buttons, revisit old wounds. But you've evolved. You've outgrown the bait, and growth is the loudest exit you'll ever make. The games crumble not because you exposed them, but because you stopped playing. You withdrew your attention. You shut off the emotional faucet. You turned inward and upward toward God, toward purpose, toward destiny. The narcissist is left pacing because control is useless without cooperation. But you've divorced yourself from the dysfunction. You've married your mission, and now every tactic they use only highlights their desperation. Your peace becomes their panic. Your joy becomes their judgment. Your progress becomes their punishment. But this isn't about revenge, it's about realignment. You've returned to your center. You've remembered who you were before the gaslighting, before the guilt, before the trauma bonding. You've rediscovered your identity in purpose, not in pain, and that's when the power shifts. That's when the narcissist realizes they were never the main character in your story, they were just a plot twist that built your strength. You are not here to shrink so others can feel big. You are not here to carry people who refuse to walk. Your calling is too costly to keep explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. When you walk in purpose, you develop a new language, the language of clarity, and clarity says, I'm not confused, I'm called. I'm not broken, I'm becoming. I'm not too sensitive, I'm spiritually aware. The narcissist loses their power when you stop translating your truth for their comfort. Because clarity doesn't make excuses, it makes decisions. And your decision to rise becomes the death of their delusion. Here's the truth: purpose protects. It protects you from cycles, from traps, from familiar spirits wearing new faces. Purpose is the filter that says, if it doesn't push me forward, it's pulling me back. And when you apply that filter, the narcissist cannot pass through. They may knock louder, shout longer, cry harder, but they won't reach you, because purpose builds gates, not just doors. Purpose gives you discernment that doesn't need proof. You don't need to wait for betrayal to believe your intuition. You don't need to see the snake bite to know it hisses. That's clarity, that's maturity, and it terrifies manipulators. They will say you changed, and you have. But you didn't just evolve, you awakened. You saw past the performance, the pedestal, the projection. You reclaimed your name, you rewrote your narrative, and that kind of shift doesn't just disrupt relationships, it destroys strongholds. The narcissist operated in your blind spots, but purpose gave you sight. They exploited your empathy, but purpose gave you boundaries. They manipulated your kindness, but clarity gave you courage. Now they're standing in the rubble of games that no longer work, wondering how their favorite puppet grew a spine. But you're not looking back. You're building, you're rising, you're becoming all that was buried beneath their control. And that is the true torment, not that you left, but that you leveled up, not that you escaped, but that you evolved, not that you survived, but that you thrived. You broke the cycle. You turned the pain into power. You took the same sensitivity they mocked and turned it into supernatural discernment. You used the same empathy they drained and turned it into divine wisdom. You took the very pieces they tried to scatter and built a platform. And now you stand not bitter but better, not broken but whole, not confused but clear. That is how the games of the narcissist crumble. Not with fire and fury, but with focus. Not with screaming matches, but with spiritual alignment. Not with revenge, but with vision. Because once you know why you're here, you stop giving energy to what doesn't belong there. Purpose makes you unshakable. Clarity makes you untouchable. And when those two collide, every manipulator is forced to face the truth they never had the power. You just hadn't seen yours yet. Peace in the soul is the loudest silence that drives chaos mad. Peace in the soul is the loudest silence that drives chaos mad. It is the stillness that doesn't shake, the calm that cannot be manipulated, and the quiet confidence that exposes every counterfeit storm. When a super empath reaches this level of inner tranquility, the narcissist loses their most powerful weapon, emotional disturbance. You see, narcissists thrive in noise. They orchestrate conflict like a conductor, creating drama, tension, confusion, and urgency, because in the chaos they find control. They know that if they can get you to react, they can guide your behavior. If they can keep you anxious, they can keep you attached. But when peace enters the soul of the empath, real peace, not the pretend kind, not the passive kind, but the kind rooted in self, awareness, and divine identity, it creates a soundless resistance that no manipulator can overcome. The narcissist begins to unravel, not because you're fighting back, but because you've stopped responding. You've disconnected from the chaos. You've stepped out of the ring. You're no longer a player in their emotional circus. And that silence is not weakness, it's warfare. To the narcissist, your peace is offensive. It's disruptive, because it tells them you no longer need them to validate your emotions. You no longer depend on their approval to define your worth. The control they had was based on your inner unrest, your need to fix, to please, to make peace at any cost. But now you've made peace with yourself, and that changes everything. The battlefield is empty. The weapons they used, guilt, blame, gaslighting, suddenly don't land the way they used to. They throw their usual lines, and you don't flinch. They try their passive, aggressive silence, and you remain unmoved. They attempt emotional blackmail, and you just breathe. You are not cold, you are centered. You are not detached, you are discerning. That kind of spiritual stillness breaks every chain the narcissist tried to forge in your mind. Because peace is not the absence of problems, it is the presence of power. It is what happens when you decide that your internal climate will not be dictated by someone else's dysfunction. When peace rules the soul, manipulation dies of starvation. Drama becomes boring, mind games become transparent. You stop chasing explanations and start protecting your energy, and make no mistake, your peace will irritate every spirit that was assigned to keep you in bondage. Because peace reflects maturity. It reflects that you no longer have to win an argument to feel whole. You don't have to explain yourself to be understood. You don't need the last word, the emotional reaction, the long-winded text. You just are. And that being, that calm, rooted, divine awareness is loud in the spirit. It screams to every manipulator, access denied. It speaks in a language chaos cannot interpret. Peace terrifies those who are used to controlling you through conflict. Because the moment you stopped defending yourself, you started defining yourself. You no longer derive identity from what they give or withhold, and that, for a narcissist, is unbearable. They will do everything to shatter that peace. They will push your buttons harder, try to relive the past, provoke old wounds, mirror your growth with counterfeit healing. But you've seen too much now. You've touched real peace, and it feels like freedom. You know what it's like to sleep without emotional tension in your chest. You know what it's like to speak without walking on eggshells. You know what it's like to breathe deeply and not feel like you're suffocating under invisible weight. And once you've tasted that kind of calm, you're not going back to chaos disguised as connection. You'd rather be alone and whole than together and fragmented. That decision to choose peace over presence, wholeness over history, is what separates the healed from the hostage. You're no longer a prisoner to their emotional roller coaster. You've stepped off, and you're watching from a distance, steady and silent. Understand this. Peace is not passive. It is intentional. It is fiercely protected. You had to fight battles in your own soul to get here, to confront your own patterns, your own pain, your own longing for validation. You had to admit where you gave too much, trusted too fast, stayed too long. You had to unlearn the lie that love equals suffering. And now, in the aftermath of that inner war, you stand with a calm that confuses your enemies, because it wasn't given by them, and it can't be taken by them. That kind of peace is sacred. It speaks volumes in silence. It's the assurance of knowing who you are, whose you are, and where you're going. The narcissist can't follow you there. They're still chasing reactions. You're resting in revelation. This is why the super empath becomes dangerous to every toxic system they leave, because they don't just walk away. They walk into alignment. They don't just escape, they evolve. And their very existence becomes a testimony. A peaceful soul is a threat to a controlling spirit. It represents everything the narcissist pretends to have but can never maintain, because control is a mask, but peace is a manifestation. Control is about others. Peace is about yourself. The narcissist constructs a kingdom of chaos to keep you disoriented, but you've torn down their towers by refusing to be triggered. Your calm is a wrecking ball to every facade they've built. Your stillness is their judgment. Your joy is their exposure. And let me say this clearly, you did not gain this peace by accident. You earned it. You prayed for it. You cried for it. You bled for it. You walked through shadows for it. And now that you have it, you're not going to give it away cheaply. Your boundaries are not walls, they are fences with gates. You decide who enters. You decide who stays. And anyone who threatens that peace loses access, no matter their title, history, or bloodline, because peace is not just a feeling, it's a standard. It's a spiritual address. It's the atmosphere of the healed. And the moment you prioritize it, everything that contradicts it becomes obvious. So let the narcissist scream into the void. Let them spin their stories, cast their blame, spread their poison. You are no longer on that frequency. You've tuned in to something higher. You've discovered the beauty of undisturbed mornings, of quiet nights, of laughter that doesn't carry weight. You've realized that peace is not the reward, it's the starting point. From here you build. From here you love again, wiser, fuller, freer. From here you lead, and that is the real power, not in how loudly you left, but in how quietly you rose. The moment the empath stops explaining, the narcissist starts decaying. The moment the empath stops explaining, the narcissist starts decaying, not because words held power, but because your silence now holds more. You see, explanation was never just about clarity. For the empath, it was an extension of love, a bridge of understanding, a plea for peace. But for the narcissist, your explanations were the perfect playground. Every word you gave, they twisted. Every motive you revealed, they manipulated. Every vulnerability you confessed, they stored like ammunition. Because to the narcissist, your need to explain was proof of your dependence. It was evidence of your emotional investment, and investment is control. But when an empath evolves, when they awaken and grow tired of the endless loops, the gaslighting, the circular conversations, the false accusations, and the performative apologies, they realize something sacred. Clarity is not a gift you owe anyone, especially not someone who has already decided to misunderstand you. The moment you stop explaining, you take back your spiritual breath. You withdraw your energy from the black hole of their ego, and suddenly they can't feed anymore. They can't feast on your compassion. They can't extract meaning from your words. The lifeline you once extended in your kindness becomes the rope you now pull back to rescue yourself. You see, the narcissist's game is only strong when you keep playing it, and explanations are the moves that kept you on their board. They would bait you, and you'd respond. They'd accuse you, and you'd defend. They'd disappear, and you'd beg for closure. They'd sabotage intimacy, then demand connection, and every time you'd explain because your heart was pure. You thought if you could just say it the right way, they would hear you. You believed if you could just show your sincerity, they would soften. But the narcissist doesn't want healing, they want control. They don't want understanding, they want submission. And when the empath wakes up to that truth, the dynamic shatters. You stop offering context to someone who benefits from confusion. You stop translating your heart to someone fluent in control, and your silence becomes your revolution. It says, I no longer owe you access to my soul. It says, I've reclaimed the energy you kept draining. It says, this conversation ended the moment I realized it was never a dialogue, only a performance for your ego. And that silence, that holy, sovereign silence, is what terrifies the narcissist the most. Because they can't decode it, they can't spin it, they can't provoke it. Narcissists don't decay from distance alone, they decay from irrelevance. When the empath stops explaining, the narcissist becomes background noise. They go from being the center of attention to an echo in the past. Their tricks fall flat. Their attempts to rekindle old arguments go unanswered. The drama they once created to pull you back now feels like static in a room filled with purpose. They are left with themselves, and they hate that space. You were their mirror, their muse, their emotional power source, and now that you're gone, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, energetically, the decay begins. The mask slips, the charm turns into desperation, the rehearsed lines now reek of insecurity. The person who once seemed larger than life now looks small, not because they've changed, but because your perspective has. What the narcissist never counted on was your growth. They expected you to stay in the loop, chasing clarity, seeking closure, giving them the benefit of the doubt, but evolution makes explanation unnecessary. Growth brings elevation, and when you rise, you see the game from above. You stop playing checkers with people who live on chessboards of deceit. You stop answering questions from people who never cared about the truth. You stop defending your integrity to those who weaponize your empathy. The empath's silence is not a void, it is a fortress. It's not weakness, it's wisdom. It's what happens when you realize that you were never misunderstood, you were mistreated. And that's a problem explanation can't solve. That's a wound only boundaries can heal. When the empath stops explaining, they start reclaiming. They reclaim time. They reclaim dignity. They reclaim the parts of themselves that were lost in the dance of dysfunction. And the narcissist, left without an audience, begins to crumble, because without your emotional labor, they are exposed. Without your validation, they are hollow. Without your constant reassurance, they are forced to sit in the silence of their own brokenness, and that silence is louder than any confrontation. You see, confrontation is what they wanted. It gave them access. It gave them your voice, your passion, your pain. But now they face a locked door and no key, and every knock is met with stillness. Every bait is ignored. Every guilt trip ends with a dead end. That is the decay. It is spiritual. It is internal. It is the unraveling of a false kingdom built on someone else's emotional generosity. And yet, for the empath, this silence is not just about the narcissist. It is a gateway to deeper healing. It's the space where self-respect is reborn. It's where you begin to hear your own voice again, not the echoes of manipulation, but the rhythm of your soul. You start creating, dreaming, rebuilding. You begin to speak life back into the areas that were drained. You start investing in peace rather than defending against chaos. You discover that you don't have to be loud to be powerful. You don't have to justify to be right. You don't have to prove anything to people who were never listening, and in that realization you shift dimensions. You become someone the narcissist cannot touch. You walk with presence. You radiate clarity. You stand in a truth that doesn't need defending, only protecting. The decay of the narcissist is not always visible. It may come quietly. It may look like desperation masked as indifference. It may sound like new stories, new targets, new facades. But you'll know it by one sign. They've lost your attention, and that attention, that sacred gaze, that soul-level engagement was their lifeline. It was the one thing they couldn't create on their own. And now it's gone, and you, the empath, are free. Free to live without the weight of their mood swings. Free to love without walking on glass. Free to lead without explaining every step. Free to evolve without asking permission. This is your new life. A life where your silence is holy, not hostile. A life where your peace speaks louder than your pain. A life where your boundaries are not walls, but declarations. A life where your healing is not loud, but visible. A life where you no longer chase closure because you are the closure. So let the narcissist spin, let them project, let them pretend. Your silence already told the truth. Your withdrawal already delivered the verdict. Your healing already wrote the final chapter. And now, while they decay in the absence of control, you rise in the fullness of your calling. You are no longer trying to convince someone of your worth. You know it. You're no longer trying to keep broken systems alive. You're building something new, something real, something eternal. The narcissist may never understand it, but they will feel it in every ignored message, in every unanswered call. In every moment you choose peace over performance. In every breath you take that doesn't involve them. That's the power. That's the transformation. That's the silence that breaks every chain. When love stops being blind, the narcissist becomes invisible. When love stops being blind, the narcissist becomes invisible not because they disappeared, but because they were never real to begin with. What you once thought was love was often a reflection of your longing, your hope, your vision, and your unmatched capacity to see potential where others only saw manipulation. But the moment love grows eyes trained by wisdom, eyes shaped by wounds turned into wisdom, eyes that have cried enough and finally dried, the illusion begins to shatter. You begin to see clearly. You begin to discern not just what is said, but what is missing between the lines. You start noticing the contradictions in their words, the emptiness in their apologies, the agenda behind every "I love you." When love is blind, the narcissist thrives because your devotion clouds your discernment. You give grace where there should be boundaries. You excuse what should be exposed. You romanticize what should be rejected. But when love matures, when it sees with sober eyes and stands with sacred dignity, the narcissist loses their camouflage. Their tricks stop working. Their charm loses power. Their mask slips, and what once captivated you now repels you. The light comes on and the magician disappears. You realize that what they gave you was not love, it was performance, it was seduction, it was a carefully crafted illusion designed to keep you orbiting their ego. They mirrored your light to gain your trust, only to dim it later so they could shine by comparison. They wore the costume of compatibility, saying everything you wanted to hear, becoming everything you thought you needed until they didn't. Until the mask cracked and their real nature slipped through. But by then, you were already deep emotionally invested, spiritually entangled, trauma bonded, and love, in its blindness, told you to stay. To forgive again, to fix it, to fight harder, because love without vision becomes sacrifice without purpose. But the moment your love gains sight, not bitterness, but insight, the spell breaks. You start asking questions you were once too afraid to voice. You stop ignoring the red flags you once called passion. You stop calling their neglect independence, and their manipulation misunderstood. You see it now, all of it, the patterns, the cycles, the way they programmed you to betray yourself just to stay in their good graces. And now that you see, you can never unsee. That is when the narcissist begins to fade, not because they left, but because you stopped projecting value onto what was hollow. You stopped worshipping the illusion. You stopped editing your reality to fit their fantasy, and suddenly they don't shine like they used to. Their presence doesn't command your energy. Their attention doesn't thrill you. Their silence no longer scares you. You see the child behind the mask, the fear behind the arrogance, the insecurity behind the control, and you don't hate them, you simply don't need them anymore. That is the death of their power. Narcissists feed on perception, they live in the minds of their victims. But when love sees clearly, it stops romanticizing pain. It stops feeding illusions. It stops building temples on toxic foundations. And when that happens, the narcissist's empire crumbles. They become invisible not because they vanished, but because you stopped giving them form with your affection. This kind of clarity is not coldness. It is freedom. It is holy. It is the moment your heart aligns with truth, and your soul refuses to be deceived again. You look back at what you endured, the gaslighting, the cycles, the highs and lows, the moments you questioned your sanity, and instead of blaming yourself, you begin to bless the awakening. You stop asking, "Why did I love them?" and start asking, "What did I not yet love in myself?" Because love, when blind, is outward, focused. It seeks to fix, to heal, to rescue. But love with sight turns inward. It says, "I choose me," not out of pride, but out of reverence. Not because they aren't lovable, but because you are no longer willing to be unloved in the process. This is the transformation when love stops being blind, it becomes wise, it becomes bold, it stops rescuing people who drown you while pretending to need saving, it stops begging for crumbs at the table of manipulation. It walks away not to punish but to preserve, and here's the mystery: the narcissist doesn't know what to do with this kind of clarity. They're used to power through confusion, they're masters of distortion. But when love sees clearly, when your voice no longer trembles, when your heart no longer chases ghosts, they lose their reflection. Because narcissists don't have substance, they borrow yours. They steal your language, your dreams, your identity. They become who you are, then resent you for seeing through them. And when you walk away with eyes open and heart intact, you remove their supply. You remove the mirror. You remove the light they were using to shine. And that invisibility is not metaphor, it is spiritual justice. It is restoration. It is the divine rebalancing of a distorted reality. You begin to rise not because they diminished, but because you stopped shrinking. You expand into your full truth. You reclaim your intuition. You heal the parts of you that once equated love with pain, loyalty with self, betrayal, commitment with suffering. You no longer see walking away as failure, you see it as graduation. You didn't abandon love, you found it, and it started with you. That's the part the narcissist can never comprehend. They believe love is control, power, admiration, but you've learned that love is clarity. Love is truth, love is alignment, and anything that costs your peace is too expensive, no matter how charming it looks. When love stops being blind, you start loving differently. You start loving wisely. You start loving from overflow, not obligation. You no longer choose people for their potential, you choose them for their patterns. You stop confusing chemistry with destiny. You stop calling dysfunction passion. You wait, you observe, you discern. And in that posture, the narcissist and all who operate like them can no longer approach you, because they sense it. The gates have lifted, the fog is gone, and the person who once handed over their soul so easily now guards it like treasure. You are no longer accessible to chaos. You are no longer flattered by false promises. You don't need a hero. You are whole. You are rooted. You are awake. And so the narcissist fades not into obscurity, but into the past, where they belong. You no longer check their status. You no longer decode their messages. You no longer track their patterns. You've moved into light. You've moved into clarity. You've moved into the kind of love that protects, builds, restores, and sees. And that sight is your salvation. That wisdom is your warfare. That clarity is your crown. So walk in it, and never again dim your vision for anyone who cannot stand in the light of your truth.